Hello, Measure Masters. Welcome to this month's live stream. If you're watching this on the replay, we will probably have down below some timestamps so you'll be able to catch up when this actually starts. So probably in 10-15 minutes, we'll actually start with the content of this presentation. And if you don't want to view me here going through the chat, then you can skip forward. All right. So welcome everybody who is on live. We are getting more and more people in here. And let me just see. We have already some comments from Michael and Eneko from Spain. He's from Spain. Welcome to this live stream. I'm just going to hang out a bit. We are going to start in 13 minutes sharp. So we can get through the content. I have a lot of questions this time. So the first question probably for you guys who are already watching is, can you hear me? And maybe write in the chat where you're watching this from so I know as well. Okay, I'm just gonna go over and do some technical stuff here. So we have everything set up. Seems to be working. It would be interesting if I actually, or if we have, let me just. Hey, Michael is here from Utrecht. Funny, I just resized the screen and suddenly my OBS crashed. So I need to go through the testing a little bit again. If you guys can hear me, let me know. Should be all right. Let me just test here again. Okay, it should be working again fine. I was just switching over my screen and suddenly the whole program crashed, but we are online again, so it should be working. Cool, I have a little bit of a presentation prepared. Now I was a bit overwhelmed with the questions that I got beforehand, so I tried to keep everything short, really make put a demo in here as well, but try to get to your questions so we be answering them as well. If you have any questions during the presentation, I won't be able to read the chat while I'm going through this, so I will just go through them later on, just leave them in there, and I hope this then makes sense. So let me just see. I have my presentation queued up here. See if this works. Probably I should put myself up here. All right. Cool. What time is it? 9 minutes left. So quick, ask me anything. If you have any questions, just leave them in the chat for now, and maybe we can answer them. We have gotten a lot of new questions. Maybe not too many people are online because of Cyber Monday. Today is Cyber Monday, so this is one of the things that might be holding people at another place. Who knows? So Michael asked a question earlier, Michael Marquez, what are some of your favorite conversion hacks? Well, conversions are, you always want to get to the more accurate picture of conversions, right? So I always say that if I can get to to track something more accurately or with more data, I love that kind of stuff. And I guess the hacks are really the tricky part sometimes that you have in your tracking system. I will show one of my favorite things that I do when I come up with a challenge that we'll get to when the path is broken. But they are really, if you think about it, it depends on your system and your preferences of technology. But even if you do affiliate sales, so you sell a product from somebody else on their website, you can oftentimes track through to the conversion. Depends on what data they give you, but most of the affiliate systems actually let you transfer over dynamic parameters. So you would be able to put them onto the URL and then send the user onto another the affiliate website or where the user actually buys the product. And then that affiliate will transfer that data back to you. So you would be actually, even with with Amazon, would be able to know how effective was my Facebook marketing campaign to my site. And then I transferred that data over to the affiliate. And you can tag your links. And this goes actually far when you use some special kind of link tracking. So I love that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is a little bit, specialized on that front. Then we have, Michael said, if a user clicks on a Facebook ad and goes to the website, could I segment that user and serve them ads on YouTube? Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So you have basically data in Facebook and in YouTube, and you have data on Facebook and you would like to transfer it to YouTube or retarget the same audience. That is possible, but only if you have the user on your website somehow, right? You can fire these conversion tags. There's no way of transferring data from Facebook to YouTube. Even if, you cannot download data from Facebook. You would need to have the identifier of the actual user, and Facebook doesn't give us that, right? You would need to have some kind of connection between those. If the user is right now on his computer, he goes to the website, you want to transfer that data over to YouTube, you could do this via retargeting pixel, for example, but this only happens on the user's browser. It doesn't happen by taking data from Facebook and transferring it over to YouTube or to Google in that matter. So it's a bit tricky, but yeah, there are ways. If you bundle people and they are on their website right now, you could fire certain tags within Google Tag Manager, for example. So that would be one possibility. Then we have Alex here, Alex Voigt. Hey, Alex, how can I pass dynamic URL parameters on button click? I want to pass parameters with data from cookie to another page. Yes, this is something I'm going to bring out in a video pretty soon. I think next video that we have on this channel. I explained this a bit more thoroughly. It takes some JavaScript and some setup work, so wouldn't be comfortable doing this on the live stream right now, as I would need to try out a lot of things. But in essence, you need to have some JavaScript to look through all the links on your web page and then rewrite these links to attach something to a link in that manner. Wait for that video. I hope that that helps. Okay, I want to also go up in our other group and post this. So I'm gonna go over to Facebook. We are live. Come join us. Okay. I'm also gonna put this. I hate YouTube sometimes. They make it quite hard to switch between the different pages that they have. They have now a new YouTube studio thing. And sometimes you land in one and sometimes you land in another. Ta-da. And we want to cool. I think that's it. Send out the email. Probably you guys got the email, right? Then Crime Wave 9 asks, hey Julian, just wanted to say you like celebrity to me. Life-changing in my income ability, and big thank you. Thanks. I always appreciate when I hear that I have an impact on people's life. And yeah, keep on viewing, I guess. That's the only thing that I can say. But thanks for the kind words. So again, we're going to start here in about 2 minutes. And what these live trainings are mostly all about is you guys. So you learn something. What we do here is I have prepared a little bit of a presentation. So I take you through more of theoretical parts of taking everybody who's a beginner to an understanding level. And then I'm going to show off a little bit of a tracking technique in a live demo. Hopefully it will work. And then third, I gonna answer your questions. So if you have any questions during the presentation or afterwards, please leave them in the chat. We have gathered some questions and I have a lot of them today, so I'm trying to get through all of them later on. If you're watching this on the replay, you can at any time look down below in the description and there are some timestamps, so you'll be able to skip forward. And we are... Yeah, and during the presentation, I won't be able to look at the chat and see anything. So just let me know if there's anything later on in the chat. Just leave them in the chat. I'm going to go through it later on. So 1 minute left here. Michael said last week he started with the Snapchat Pixel. Now it's available in the Netherlands. Have you already checked it out? No, I haven't. Yeah. I guess Snapchat for me is not something that I've tried too much, but probably should look into it just from a tracking perspective. So no, I haven't yet. Cool. And Michael is from San Francisco, USA. So you guys pretty early. No, pretty late for you guys, right? In the USA. Well, anyways, this will be recorded as well. So it's 10 right now. So let's dive in to today's live training about conversion tracking. Welcome, Measure Masters. Today we're going to talk about conversion tracking, and it's Monday, November 19th. Gotten cold here in Berlin, but I'm going to take off to a short vacation to India soon. So I'm looking forward to that. Now today we want to do our live training for November. And I have taken up a topic which really follows up to last month's training, which was source tracking. And we're going to go through a little bit of presentation and then dive into some demos and Q&A at the end. So what are we going to cover? Whoops. Let's go over here. Gonna get rid of my face, otherwise you guys can't see me. What are we going to cover today? First of all, the basics of conversion tracking. Then we'll go into some challenges, common challenges in conversion tracking, and sometimes also some questions that come up in conversion tracking. Then I'm going to briefly touch on the future of conversion tracking, what can we expect, and go into Q&A. Now, we got a lot of questions over the last few days about what questions I should answer in this Q&A, and I'm going to try to get through all of them. If you're watching this live, you can also leave them in the comments, so we'll be able to go in and see them. All right, let me just open up this pointer thing. Let's go into the basics. What is conversion tracking all about? So first of all, we need to define certain variables here. What is a conversion? Well, a conversion is really what you want your user to take on your website, to do on your website, an action or a step that he should go through. And in most cases, or the easiest example, obviously, is e-commerce tracking and buying a product. So the user should buy a product, and conversion is simply what we define as success. So buying a product, signing up to something, sending off a contact form, visiting a certain page, reading through an article, we can define it and say anything in the world could be a conversion, like scratching the back of my head. But the question is, can we actually track it? And that's when conversion tracking actually comes in. So conversion tracking is simply the measurement of that conversion in terms of metrics. Now, in Google Analytics or in our digital marketing efforts, we obviously can't track everything, but we can find an approximation to it. And this is the art of conversion tracking, because conversion tracking is very important. So why do we actually do conversion tracking inside of our function as a digital marketer or as an analyst? We drive traffic to the website, or the Department of Marketing drives traffic to the website. Digital marketing efforts lead people to our product, to our website. Users go through the website and then they hopefully convert. They spend money with us, they sign up to a contact form, they give us the lead information so we can follow up with them. And there are two tracking forms that are super important in order to make this all work. And this is the source tracking. So where's the user coming from? And then the conversion tracking. Did the user take the action that we intended him to take? Now, why are we doing this? Well, you might know of sentences like, hey, I have now 5,000 people that came from Facebook, right? The question is always, so what? Or my bounce rate is at 54%. Well, so what? 30 people signed up to my newsletter. So what? It's all about context. And conversion tracking actually gives us context. All data in Google Analytics doesn't tell us anything, and you might experience that if you ever logged into a Google Analytics account where no conversion tracking was set up, and you weren't able to actually look at the data and say, well, this is pretty good. Well, good is always we can obviously compare to another website and say, oh, you just had 5,000 visitors from Facebook? Well, that's not much. I had 10,000, right? You can compare. But what does it mean for your website in order to get this amount of, or the interpretation on the data? It's about context. So just in Google Analytics, for example, if you go to the acquisition and all traffic report and look under source medium, we have all this data available, and this is great. But this is really source and conversion tracking in action. You see here the sources that the user came from. You see how many people came from those sources, and it doesn't really tell you anything. Yes, it ranks it a bit, so you would be able to say, oh, I got most of my users from Google Organic. But what does this actually do to you? Or do to your do for your analysis, and how can you take action on that data? Well, you need to connect it back to the actual conversion tracking, to the action that you want the user to take. And this is what is really about here in the last column. You can choose conversions in terms of e-commerce, or your goal conversions here, purchase completed, and so on. And this will then display, again, your sources and if the user converted. And this is great because we'll be able to get context on our data. We'll be able to say 8,000 people came from this source and 9 converted. And then we can calculate metrics such as the bounce rate or the conversion rate, and be able to rank and performance rank our different sources. So it's not just, hey, Google Organic did well, but maybe another traffic source, no, there's no real other traffic source that did better as Google Organic, right? But you could say, hey, I spent money on Google CPC, and now you could then say, I spent money on it, but how much money did I make on it? And this is what conversion tracking is all about. We're going to get into some differences in conversion tracking in a second, but in the end, the bigger picture here is simply that you, let me go back, you want to get that funnel that you have on your website tracked. You want to know where the user came from and if he converted. And conversion tracking gives you that crucial part of context. So how does conversion tracking normally work? How does the tracking art of it work? Well, conversion tracking, if we have that simple example of you having a Facebook ad or a Google ad, and the user clicks on that Google ad, he goes to your landing page. That's the first page that the user lands on. And then he goes through different other pages and he gets to the thank you page. Now, this could be a page view, this could be an event or so, but in the end, he gets to that crucial part of where we would like to conversion track. And this is where we need to install our conversion tracking in order to send that information about the action to our tracking tools. And there are obviously different tracking tools and different holders of information where we could send that tracking information to. But they work differently. And let's take a look at how AdWords would actually, or Google Ads, or what it's called now, would track this. Well, Google AdWords doesn't actually do anything on our website at first glance, because they just care about when the user clicks on the ad. They can register the click and they know this user who will now go to this website that we sold this click to has clicked on this ad. And we will register and we will actually put this into a cookie so we remember later on. Then the user goes onto the page, goes through these different pages, stages of your website, and then finally he converts. Now, the conversion can happen on a thank you page, could also be an action, so an event in terms of a form submit or button click or so on. But when that happens, we want to deploy the Google Ads conversion tracking. And this is a piece of tracking code that you can get from Google Ads, and it will send information over back to Google Ads. Now, what actually happens is it sends any kind of information. Every time somebody converts, it sends it over to AdWords, but then AdWords on their back end will determine, oh, did this user that we just got the information from click on an ad previously? If yes, we will count this as a conversion. If no, we will just throw it away. And that's how AdWords does conversion tracking and most of the ad vendor tools. So if you look at Facebook, if you look at Snapchat or Instagram or LinkedIn, they have conversion tracking codes that you can then simply install on the thank you page. Now, again, it's not all about the thank you page. You can also track events and so on. But in the end, what Google Ads just cares about is the ad click. That's what they can register because it happens on their website. They don't really look at your website except when you trigger that crucial conversion code. Opposite to that, we have Google Analytics. And Google Analytics doesn't track on the vendor side. We don't have Google Analytics installed on Google or on Facebook. We only have Google Analytics installed on our website. So how does it happen there? Well, what Google Analytics sees is really traffic coming in. That's something that happens through the referrer. We talked about this in the last live training. And then the user goes through the website and Google Analytics actually sets a cookie so it can remember the relation between the source tracking and the conversion tracking. And later, when the user converts, we can classify that information in Google Analytics as a conversion. It's crucial to understand the difference between this because in Google Ads tracking or in the ad vendor tracking, we actually send explicit information over only when a user converts. We send that information over to Google Ads. On Google Analytics side, we just send a bunch of information and then later on classify it as goals. How does that work? Well, crucially on the thank you page, We sending over an interaction hit to Google Analytics. We send hits. Google Analytics just receives hits. It receives hits in terms of page views, in terms of events, in terms of transactions, in terms of timing hits. So there are many different hits that could actually go into Google Analytics. What Google Analytics does goes all into the database. This is the raw data that goes in, and then it calculates and it processes that data. And depending on rules that you have set up in your Google Analytics, it will put it into one or the other category. Is this just a metric? Or is this actually a metric that is also classified as a conversion or as a goal? And this is crucially in Google Analytics. If you set up goals, this is just a rule that classifies the data inside of your system. So when you set up a goal, you have these different types of goals that you can define. So for example, a destination or an event goal. And every time that a page view comes in, based on the rule that you have defined in the destination goal, Google Analytics will say, okay, this user now converted. And then it can backtrack and say, okay, this whole session actually converted, or this whole user converted, right? But you don't send explicit information when you do goal tracking. At least you don't send explicit information into Google Analytics saying this is a conversion, but conversion tracking actually works in terms of you sending your normal data over and then classifying or setting up a rule to classify that this session should now be counted as conversion. So this is very crucial in that part. Now we have other conversion tracking mechanisms in Google Analytics. The other conversion tracking mechanism is actually enhanced or e-commerce tracking. And e-commerce tracking is when you have an e-commerce site, you can send more data, more parameters, more information about the actual conversion to Google Analytics. And this is specifically built for e-commerce because it has a certain model, a certain rule set behind it that you send in. Google Analytics has a very strong e-commerce background because a lot of e-commerce sites are out there and a lot of their customers are in the Google ad space. But obviously you could send over information about this as well. If you have, for example, a gaming site or a SaaS business or so. Now, e-commerce data is really explicit information that you send over on the thank you page about what the user has bought, how much he has bought, different products and so on. And it gives you a bigger reporting set of your information on how this information actually is put together and then put into your system. So if you run an e-commerce site, I would say you definitely should put in the e-commerce tracking. I don't know if I should do a little demo here, but in the end, if we go to the goals here again, some people get tripped up with goals because they don't really understand how can I send conversion tracking information from Google Tag Manager to Google Analytics. And it's not really the case that you can actually send data in explicitly, except you do e-commerce tracking, into Google Analytics. You need to set this up as a rule-based system inside of Google Analytics. So if you have, for example, registrations, you set this up and you say, I have a goal that's called registration. No, this is a demo account, so I can't actually edit anything of this. And I set up a rule. Every destination rule, every page view should be counted, or every page view should be evaluated with the rule. And can we actually change the rule here? Oh yeah, here with the rule, regular expression should be register success.html. So you can set up a rule set in order for your page views to be classified. And there are different types. You can actually set up revenue goals, acquisition, and so on. I always go to custom. I always click here on custom actually. And I only choose destination or event goal. Some people choose duration or page per screen, but these are actually calculated metrics within Google Analytics. So within the system, I don't think they hold so much value if I know somebody is on the page for 5 minutes, because the way that Google Analytics tracks it is a bit iffy. And then we also have smart goals. I actually haven't heard of anybody who has gotten much value out of smart goals. These are machine learned goals that Google Analytics sets up automatically. And they suggest something like, hey, you have form submit, and we were able to track this, so here it is now. The problem with that is that it's rarely very intentional when you track something like this. So Google Analytics or the team at Google, they said, okay, if the user has nothing set up, let's just set up a smart goal in order for them to make it easier. So this is a bit about goal tracking, and then you also have enhanced e-commerce tracking. Now this is something that you set up specifically in Google Tag Manager and send over. And we don't have time to go through that today. Maybe check out our enhanced e-commerce tracking training that we did a few months ago. So I want to get into challenges now, and these are typical challenges that people face. And I want to go into one demo, really. So the first the tracking challenge that oftentimes people have is that they are actually path interruptions. So what if a user comes from AdWords and fills out information to register to a webinar, and then you send them out an email? The problem with that is that you really have an interrupt in the conversion path. The user is not just on the website like we did it here. So this is not one session. The user goes from the source to conversion tracking in one session, but you actually send them out emails and inform them, and maybe the user path is more on email. And then later, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 weeks later, you send them a link so they come back to your website and you say, hey, the webinar is starting, for example. But oftentimes even the webinar is not on the website itself, so you wouldn't be able to track this with Google Analytics. And Google Analytics at that point probably has lost the information of the user. So it cannot track back to where the user came from. It would just put this into the direct none column. The user just came from an email. And if he then converts, because you send him out an offer, or on the webinar you say, hey, register here now, then you wouldn't be able to backtrack to your source tracking. So you wouldn't be able to say this user originally came from AdWords. And that is common because you have an interrupt in your session or in your tracking mechanism. So you wouldn't be able to track back between the original source and the conversion. And that's when it gets tricky. And I had this exact case with a client who asked me, hey, how can I do conversion tracking inside of my Infusionsoft software? Because Infusionsoft is a CRM, if you don't know, but in the end, the user registers to a webinar, and I have that information all in Infusionsoft. Now I would like to use that information in Infusionsoft so I can optimize my ads in the end. So I want to know who has registered for the webinar and later converted. And this is a little technique that you can deploy if this is important to you. You can also do this with Google Analytics, by the way, or with Facebook. But I want to explain this case first of all. The user comes from AdWords. He goes over to your website and he fills out a form. Now, when the user actually enters from AdWords, AdWords gives us some information if you have auto-tracking or Google Analytics and AdWords connected. It will put in the GCLID into the URL. And we can actually try this out. Now, don't get mad if I'm just going to Google insurance here. Okay, I don't get any English results because I'm in Germany here. So if I click on this ad result, let's see if we can see this. Anytime somebody goes to or clicks on an ad, Google AdWords will automatically attach something to the URL, and this is the GCLID parameter. And this GCLID parameter identifies exactly what ad somebody has clicked on and puts this into the system. So it puts it into the system on Google side, but then it also transfers it to your website. So you could use this one to say, okay, this user who's actually on this website right now has clicked on this specific ad. You just need to reconnect it. And this is what this technique is all about. So you have a form field, and you can add a hidden form field. In that form field, you can take the GCLID and transfer it into that hidden form field. Then the user signs up, and the information obviously goes to Infusionsoft. Now, or Infusionsoft or any other CRM system. Now, if the user later converts here, sorry for this pop-up thing, but I don't know if I can actually get rid of it. Anyways, if the user then converts later, we have that information obviously also in our Infusionsoft. So in Infusionsoft, it's also a card software. It would know where the user, if the user converted. Now we can match up that data and build a customer list. And in that customer list, we can say we have the name, for example, all the names that have converted, and we can match it up with our GCLID because we also track that inside of Infusionsoft. Now, once we have that information available in a list, we would be able to re-upload this into AdWords. Now, AdWords would look into the GCLID, who has clicked on what, and since we have uploaded this as a customer or as a conversion list, or offline conversion list, we would have that now, that crucial information between the click and the conversion, and would be able to conversion track within Google AdWords or Google Ads for that matter. Now, in order to make this all work, we need to have a little bit of magic on this side, and this is what I want to show you in today's demo. So I have a webinar registration page. Let's say the user lands on this page here. Now on this page, he has a GCLID attached to his coming to the page, right? He just clicked on an ad, and now a GCLID is in his URL, just like we saw it before on this insurance page here. And now we want to transfer this over to our webinar registration page. Now you saw what just happened. Now the GCLID is not in here anymore, so I can't really just grab it from here and put it in here. I would need to have some kind of mechanism of transporting it over to the next page view. And this is where cookies come in. So our plan right now is to grab this crucial value, actually just this one, put it into a cookie. And if the user later on goes around the website and then converts, so he goes onto the webinar registration page, he fills out his information, we actually want to put this into a hidden form field. Now, what is a hidden form field? It is a form field just like this one, but it is not visible to the user. Now you see already here a little hint, and this little hint says that we have here a form field, and this is an import field. The type is hidden. If I put just changes here, we see it is now visible to the user, but the user wouldn't actually see anything, right? If we put this in as hidden in our HTML markup, the user wouldn't see it. Now you would need to do this in the backend of your CRM software, or how you actually implement this onto your HTML. So I did this with my WordPress software here in the backend, so I can actually change this around and the user doesn't see it. But once it is there, you could actually also leave out this part here, and the user wouldn't see it, but it would still be transferred over to our CRM system if we have it filled. So how can we fill this one? And this is, we want to take the information that we have stored in a cookie from the GCLID and put it in here, and then send this all off. So first of all, let's prepare something. We want to first of all get let's go back here, the actual GCLID. And this in Google Tag Manager is easily done with a URL variable. So we can go ahead and build a URL for the query parameter GCLID. So here we go. So every time somebody goes to the website, and this is a URL, this will actually grab it from the URL up there. So query, and we just need to put in the key. These are key value pairs. So key, and then here's the value. We want to get the GCLID value. All right, let's save this and shortly try it out. And under variables now, we see the GCLID is now whatever was entered up here. And so this will dynamically change based on if the user has clicked on an ad or not. Now this value I want to put into a cookie. There are different methods of doing this. You could also use a new conversion linker, but I'm gonna go the traditional way of setting a cookie. So I have something prepared here. I want to set a cookie for the GCLID, and this is a little bit of JavaScript. We can give this a name. I'm just gonna call this GCLID, and the value that we want to fill in to that is filled by our variable dynamically, and this was the URL query GCLID. How long do we want to have this alive? I don't know. This is something, if you want to keep this alive because the user is on the page long term, just going to put in a random number here, but a higher number. And we want to set this on our path and our domain. We can actually put demo shop. So it's also available cross-domain. And then this little thing sets the cookie. So let's try this out, but I only want to fire this once actually in the URL, or I want to fire this on page view, but only if the URL contains GCLID. So I'm going to go ahead and use the page view trigger and only fire this when the, you could do page path, page URL. In our case, we want to get, we have anyways already a variable called query GCLID. And let's say it is not undefined. Does not equal undefined. So it needs to be filled in order for us to pick up the information and set that cookie. Let's try this out. Save it. I just see the chat. Yes, you can get the cookie script. That's actually something that, okay. We don't even have that set up. That is unfortunate. Okay. Then we have to set up the cookie script first. Let me just see in my other accounts. Okay, this is a live demo, so where did I get this from? Oh, this is Lunametrics. Here I got this from. So I'm gonna go to variables. And here we go. I need to just put this into my GTM copy paste extension. Oh, don't crap out on me now. I need to authorize first. Let me just authorize here. Okay, now it should be visible. Okay, add to GTM copy paste. Now we have that in here. And we go over to our live account again. And just paste this in here. Okay, and now we should be able to refresh. And we have it in here now, right? Yep, should be in here. Let me just check the tag. Might be because it's not quite. Okay. in a comment. Ah, I have a comment in here. Okay, sorry. So troubleshooting live is always a good thing. Now we are ready to go. So it should take, it reads this, puts this, fires our set cookie, because we have, if we click on here, our URL parameter is not undefined. And now it puts it into a cookie. And if I open up the developer tools and under application, we see here a new cookie which transported it over, which is something we want, because when we go to the next page view, it will still be available here, and we can still read that cookie every time the user is back on our website. Now, when he finally goes into the webinar registration here and starts filling out the form, I want to be able to take that cookie value and put it into my hidden form field, which is right here somewhere. So how would I do that? First of all, I need to read the cookie. And you can read a cookie by simply using a custom variable that will read your cookie. This is something that in Google Tag Manager is already built in by default. So first party cookie, you can read that here. Just need to know the cookie's name, which is GCLID. And we should then have that available in a variable. So here's our variable. It's undefined, GCLID. What did I do wrong? Oh, too many things to go through. GCLID. Okay. And application GLCID. Okay, I did a wrong spelling in my cookie. So I have to go back. So the name is actually GCLID. And now I'm gonna go back because the cookie needs to be new set. So here we go. Now we should have under our application, we should have GCLID, this one. We can actually get rid of this. So GCLID. And this one is something we want to read with our variable. Let's see if that worked. We had our cookie variable. So here we go, cookie variable. And now we want to transport this over into our webinar registration field. And I have, again, a little source or a little bit JavaScript here. We need to know the query selector. So what is the actual way to get this form field? I'm just going to go into the developer tools here again and look at this specific hidden form field. We need to find it. And here it is. And we see it has a class that we could use in order to select this. And right now it doesn't have a value. So you can change a value actually. And I'm going to press the escape key here. So we have our developer tools. And now we can use the query selector method, document.query selector. And now I want to get this element. In this case, it would be of type hidden. So we could just say input, and then you need to know a little bit of how you can select this, but this is type equals hidden. So here we go. This is not the right one because there are actually multiple hidden form fields. So we need to use the class here. So I'm going to use this, this class control instead, and input with the class hidden. So this is it. It's exactly what we want. And we now want to fill the value. How can we do that? Simply by adding value here equals, and then we can enter anything we want. So for example, test. And you saw it change automatically. And this is when we would change this over to text. we now see that this was actually filled with test. And that's because we used this little command. And this is basically what this script here does. It ports over the source. I don't want to, the GCLID port to form. Now, how do we want to fill this? So first of all, we would need to, let's get rid of this. No. So exactly what we had here, we will copy, put this in here. And we want to not fill and test every time, but rather our cookie value for the GCLID. All right, now we just need to attach a trigger to this. And I already have a DOM trigger because the basic form needs to have loaded before we can actually put this into the page or the form itself. And this is done with the DOM ready, so this should be fine. Let's try this out. Refresh the whole thing. And now we see in our value of our input field, our hidden input field, that it was automatically filled with whatever was in the cookie itself. Okay. Now we have that done. We can theoretically go back and forth and test this, but for demo's sake and for time's sake, I'm just gonna go ahead and now we have that filled in the hidden form field. Now we put in information here and we send this off. Now this goes into our CRM system, depending on what CRM system you have set up. It could be Infusionsoft, it could just be your backend system. Just for demonstration's sake, I have a form here. And here are random form submits, everybody who has registered to our webinar. And underneath we also have our test.com with, normally it should be transferred over, but this is just a test tag. So I'm just gonna copy our GCLID here and would fill that in here, right? Now you see not everybody has a GCLID, maybe they came from Facebook or so there's no GCLID here, but this is what it would look like. You would have a bunch of registrations and these registrations would sometimes have a GCLID. And this is the customer profile, or not the customer, the lead profile. You would have the name and the email address. This would not go into Google Analytics, it would go into your CRM system. But you have another field that actually displays the GCLID if it was able to pick that up. Now the user, you send out the user a bunch of emails and he goes to your webinar, he buys your product, and inside of your CRM system, again, or in your cart system or so, you can pull an extract of everybody who has converted or has bought your product. So again, you would have the name, you would have the email address, and you would know how much revenue they made, right? Now you would need to say, okay, some of these people probably had a GCLID in here, so I want to match that up. And you could pull this all down into Google Sheets, and then we just match this up with their different formulas, but we could just use VLOOKUP. The search key here is the email address, and the range that we actually want to search through is this range here. We need to include our GCLID, and I'm gonna make this absolute, and then the index of where we want to pull this, in our case this would be 2, so the second here from column C, and sorted is false. That should do it. So here we see this user has this email address, it matched it up with our registration email address, and it took the GCLID and put it in. Now we just need to fill out these others, and we see again a customer list with some GCLID of some people who have converted, and some of those who have, some of those who are not, have a GCLID. Now I'm not really interested in those people, so I'm just gonna delete them out right here. But then I can go ahead and connect this all to AdWords. How would I do this? I would simply download this as a file and then go over to my Google Ads account, and under tools here I have my conversions. Here I see all my conversions, there's conversion tracking code and so on. But you can now import your conversions by clicking on the import option. And we don't want to use any of these options, but actually another CRM sources or CRM tool. And we want to track the conversions from clicks because these are actually click IDs. So this is the click ID. Now I won't go through how you just need to upload this thing and name this and so on. But then later in your reports, you would be able to backtrack which ad has actually been clicked and then when the user converted. So you have conversion tracking to the actual conversion level from ads. And this is far superior data as you would be sending this over via just the registration click or so. There would be a lot of clicks that would be or a lot of conversions that would be unattributed to actual conversions. And therefore, this technique is far more reliable and a bit more involved to set up. I guess when you set up Google Tag Manager, once that is done, you would be able to have this list. And then you could even automate the steps of importing this to AdWords. So there's always a way to do this. In Google Analytics, if you wanted to do this with Google Analytics, you actually need something else. You would need to have the client ID. So not the GCL ID, but the client ID inside of Analytics. And this is something, picking up client ID is something that is, every user gets a client ID in Google Analytics. So the client ID would be encoded here. This is the client ID encoded in the system. So you would be able to backtrack that in Google Analytics later on to connect it back to Google Analytics. And Facebook, for that matter, has a conversion upload as well, but only based on email addresses. So you don't need the actual GCL ID here or any kind of fancy tracking mechanisms. You can just take the email addresses and upload them to Facebook, and Facebook then would match that up with their click data. I would say that it's a bit unreliable what Facebook does because the user needs to be somehow registered with Facebook in order for their contact records to match up. But maybe they're doing something because I saw a Facebook click ID floating around. I'm not sure if this is something they're going to introduce in a while. Okay, so this is how you can overcome such tracking challenges where the path is actually interrupted. Now I want to quickly talk about two more. One is accuracy, and that's when we come to macro and micro conversions. Now accuracy, some people ask me, well, I cannot track my conversions because my purchases of my products because they're actually happening outside of my site, like let's say an affiliate. And that's when macro and micro conversions come in. What is the macro goal? Well, the user should buy something. And this is the action you really want to take, like a conversion, the big conversion goal. But you could also track micro conversions. And these micro conversions are actual actions that lead up to the macro conversion. And therefore, if you don't have any data on the macro conversion, maybe start gathering data about micro conversions. So for an affiliate, that would be, well, the user should buy my affiliate product in the partner shop. But the micro conversion here would be to actually track, and this is what is under your control, the outbound link click. So when you send the user to the affiliate, how many people were there that you actually sent? And that allows you to optimize and have a goalpost for your data and be able to know if your data converts well or bad. In the end, you cannot track in Google Analytics if the user actually converted or bought something, but you would be able to know if the user clicked out and took the action on your website at least. Same for e-commerce. If you can't track the actual e-commerce conversion because the user goes away from your page somehow, again, the macro conversion would buy a product, but the micro conversion would be to initiate this checkout, for example, or to go through and fill out an address or say that he's interested and come back to your page more often. These might be steps that a user would take in order to buy a product. And this is also something you can track. So every time you have a discrepancy or are not able to track something fully in terms of macro conversions, maybe go into the micro conversions. Insurance, contract signature, right? Only when the ink is dry, I'll be able to say this client has closed or has been able to be turned into a customer, from a prospect into a customer. But what about registering or tracking things like phone calls? So if the user calls you, that's something you could register, and there are phone call tracking systems out there that actually feed that data even back to Google Analytics. You would be able to then see where did the user come from and did he at least call me, and you can calculate the lead out of that. So the advantages of that approach are really that you get more data to work with. And this is increasingly important, I want to stress this, because Google Ads, for example, or Facebook heavily nowadays go into machine learning in terms of how they optimize the ads and how they show ads to their users. So Facebook, for example, has an inventory of users going to the website, and should we show them an ad or not? Now, you compete obviously against other ads that are also trying to reach the same user group. And therefore, Google or Facebook needs to decide which ad should they show. It's not only about who pays the most, but also will the ad perform well. And this is where Facebook and Google try to understand the relationship between how many people click on an ad and then actually convert. So the more data you can feed into the system, the better decisions they make. Well, the better, I don't know, but the more data they have to act on. If they don't have any conversion data that comes back into their system, they wouldn't know, should I actually prioritize that ad or not? So for me, giving the system more data is probably a good idea than giving them too little. And this is what micro-conversions could give you. Also, you have new retargeting capabilities. So if you track micro-conversions, you could say, okay, has the user taken that micro-conversion and converted then later on, if you are able to track that macro-conversion. And that way you would be having multiple tracking points that you can actually retarget off. So a user who has initiated checkout but didn't buy the product, retarget those. And then again, in web analytics, we talk a lot about trends. In Google Analytics, we never have perfect data, or in Facebook, we never have perfect data. But we can look at the trend and say, a lot of people have clicked out of my website, for example, and then went to the affiliate. And in the end, you get the data about the affiliate anyways. You know how many people bought the product or not. But so we should look at the trends rather than at absolute numbers. Like, can I rather track a little bit inaccurate than not tracking at all, because I can't track absolute numbers in terms of how many people bought. So I would always urge you to say, yes, it's probably not 100% accurate, but I can see the trend and I can act on that data already. So I think that's an advantage of looking at accuracy in that manner, rather than saying, I always need to get the best data possible. And well, you should strive for getting the best data possible, but it's probably not something that you would do in your analysis. You want to have data to analyze, so more data rather than no data at all is always better. And then we come to the third point, a tracking or a challenge that sometimes comes up is the comparability. So people come up to me and say, hey, what about I see completely different data in Google Analytics than in my backend system, right? And there I always have to say, okay, what are we comparing here, right? And it's a little bit oranges to apples. That the tracking technology behind Google Analytics is completely different to what you see in the backend system. The backend system is a server-side language, and this is really the gatekeeper of if the conversion goes through or not. Google Analytics, on the other hand, is a tracking code that is placed on the client side. So it's on the browser of the user executing. There could be so many different variables that actually determine whether this tracking code gets fired or not. If you blocked, for example, through a plugin or extension, your tracking codes, then that wouldn't get tracked. If you don't have JavaScript enabled, it would be tracked. If it wouldn't be tracked. But maybe in your backend system, that would show. So I would always look at what are you comparing here? Is that a fair comparison or is it totally out of bounds? Don't get me wrong. There might be instances where the tracking code is wrongly installed and it's worth looking into it. But if this discrepancy between those systems, like the backend system in your Google Analytics system, is not at 50% apart, so you don't see 50% less conversions in your Google Analytics than in the backend system, then maybe it's, you're barking up the wrong tree, so to say, because it would be a micro commitment to, or a micro improvement if you can increase the accuracy by 1%. And I would say that most of the times, I would say it's not, don't bother trying to fix this if there's a discrepancy under 10%, because there are just differences that you can't fix with different tracking techniques. I mean, or it's not warranted in terms of the input that you need to put in, or the resources that you need to put in. Now, secondly, comparing the 100% accuracy. So caring too much about, I want to get to 100%. Now, there are obviously tracking differences between the technologies, but if you say, I want to get it exactly the same with another tracking system like Google Analytics and Yandex Metrica, so there are just too many variables that you can take into account. And I would rather say not care about the 100% accuracy, but rather look at the trends again and use more your trend analysis in Google Analytics than saying I need to get to 100% accuracy. Now, obviously, it's always something we want to strive for, but in the end, the trend really works. And then third, modeling and attribution. This is something that I want to get into. Every system has their own rules defined how they actually attribute a source. And therefore, you see discrepancies, for example, between Google Analytics and Facebook ads, or Google ads for that matter. Let's take a look at, or let's go into this a little bit deeper. If a user comes from a website and a first visit from Google ads, goes to the page but doesn't convert, so he goes through different pages, doesn't convert, he comes back a little bit later and he comes through Facebook, and then he goes through a page and he doesn't convert again. And then on his third visit, he comes back through Google Organic. And this is actually a common factor you need to take into account. Let's say a user buys a product. He is in research mode at the beginning. Maybe he sees a product on Facebook, top of the funnel, and then he goes through Google AdWords because he gets reminded because remarketing, he's on a page again. And then later in his final call of buying something, goes through the search engine because he already knows your name, right? And on that page or on that visit, he then converts. How do these different tracking tools now count the conversion? Well, AdWords would actually say, okay, I set a cookie on the browser, the user clicked on an ad, and my conversion code is firing on the thank you page or on the conversion tracking. And I transport that data back to AdWords. And now I count this as a conversion. So Google AdWords, although there was certain other sources in there, with the conversion tracking that is set up through AdWords, will count this as a conversion. The second part would be Facebook. What would Facebook do in that sense? They also have their conversion tracking set up. Well, they would do exactly the same. They would say, okay, the user has clicked on my ad, or he saw my ad, or whatever, and now the user has converted. I count this as a conversion. What would Google Analytics say? Well, Google Analytics sees all of these sources. They see if somebody comes from AdWords. They see if somebody comes from Facebook. They see if somebody comes from Google Organic. But the rule that is set up inside of Analytics is the attribution rule of last non-direct source. So it will look into the sources. If it's not direct, it will take the last non-direct source and it will say, okay, this user has come from where? Last. Well, he came from Google Organic. So Facebook, so Google Analytics would simply go with Google Organic as the referrer source for that transaction. So just in a comparison, if we have a tool like AdWords, it is based on conversion tracking and it just sees the ad click. The source that comes in is Google Ads and the attribution to it is Google Ads. Same with Facebook. It counts one conversion. Now you have Facebook ads as the source and Facebook just sees himself, so to say, and the attribution goes also to your Facebook ad. And then Google Analytics sees everything, also just counts one conversion because just one conversion happened, but it sees Google ads, Facebook ads, Google Organic, but it takes the last non-direct source, which is organic, and therefore it will attribute it to organic. And that's why you sometimes see discrepancies between systems, because you would be essentially double counting. So if you tally up the ones here, you have 3 conversions, right? Although just one happened. But all systems count it as their conversion, or Google Analytics really is agnostic to it. But in Facebook or in AdWords, as long as they're part of the chain, they would count this as conversions. And therefore, the difference is really in the different rule sets that are governed by these different systems. And you need to be aware of them to make the right decision. Now, it's not inherently bad what they're doing. If I wanted to optimize my AdWords campaigns, then I want to have all the data I can get from AdWords, right? But if you have different systems or different departments that, let's say you have an employee who just does AdWords and another employee who just does Facebook ads, how would they decide what budget you get later, right? Because probably the AdWords guy would say, hey, this conversion belongs to me. And the Facebook guy says, no, this conversion belongs to me. This is all about attribution. How do you attribute your conversions to the right source? And there are differences in conversion tracking. You need to be aware of those. And there's no best practice here to say, oh, you should give half of that to AdWords and half of that to Facebook. This is individualistic, and you need to figure this out for your own business, how you want to handle this particular problem. I have talked to big companies as well, and yeah, not a lot of people have figured out what's the best practice for them, even though they have the ability to get data science projects on the way to figure this out. Now, the other thing that I often get asked, what about the conversion tracking that I can install through AdWords? This is also called website. You sometimes see this. And the conversion or the transaction tracking import that you can do automatically into AdWords. What is the difference here? And there's a simple difference in attribution. And this is really that information. If you set up conversion tracking, it would count one conversion as as AdWords was part of this this user journey. But if you would import from Google Analytics, then Google Analytics would say, well, AdWords didn't really happen. We had our non-direct source was organic, so I'm not going to give you credit for this. And therefore, you will not have information about this particular conversion in your AdWords system, and you wouldn't be able to optimize. So what I can say is, what should you use? In the end, the conversion tracking from Google AdWords is a bit greedier. It says, hey, anytime I was part of an ad click and anytime somebody converts, I'm actually taking that as a credit for me. So it gets more data into the system, which is better for optimization. But if you want to maybe get a truer picture of things, maybe you want to use transaction tracking import. Maybe you want to say, this is not your conversion to keep, so we'll use AdWords, the import from Google Analytics. I would say that you should just set up both. you can in Google AdWords, there's actually let me just show you a way to say, should I include this into conversions? If you only include this, if you only not include this, it will go under the all conversions later on in your reports. So you could set up both. So we have here analytics signups. This is imported from Google Analytics. And then we also have website, and this is the conversion code, right? So the conversion code would track it, like I explained, with the actual greedier attribution modeling, and the analytics import would use Google Analytics rules to put this into the system. And therefore, it would track less than the actual conversion tracking code. So I hope you understand the difference here. I would set up both and set up one only to include in the conversion. So you have our 2 data points available, but yeah, I actually rather prefer the attribution modeling here, so I have more data to optimize on. I hope that makes sense. Now, one last point about the future. What is the future of conversion tracking? Well, I just really have one point, and we already talked about this last time, is cross-device tracking. Now, you might be aware that in Google Analytics, you can now use that new signals system. The fact is that in a cross-device world, so if a user goes from one device to a next device, you might not be able to track the user through with these different tracking mechanisms that we have learned about, right? And we are becoming more and more reliant on the actual big players like Google and Facebook to give us data out, because they know who is the user on which device. So if the user is logged in and does something on their device, then they know, okay, this is Julian. He just went into his Gmail. He clicked on an email. He went to the search engine, which is also Google, and he's logged in. So I know that Julian is now on his phone, and he went back to the desktop side, and now he converts on this website. So Google has that information available, but the problem with is that it doesn't give us this information. One, for privacy reasons, they are not allowed to give us this data, as it gets more complicated with GDPR and so on. Second, they would, if they would give us that data, it would be massive amounts of data, right? And maybe that is something that they wouldn't really be comfortable doing, because it's also their trade secret, obviously. So data really rules the world. Unfortunately, with that device, cross-device, the world, we are always more reliant on these big players to give us the data. So Facebook, for example, can already tell if somebody has converted based on their habits inside of Facebook, right? So they can find out if a user, well, not conversion tracking in that sense, but they have very good information about the user. Google, for that matter, has information about where the user is location based, right? So if you carry your Android phone around and you go into a store, that is something that Google now introduced and says, we can give you conversion data if the user has converted, based on if the user entered your store, for example. So there's a lot of things that obviously Google and Facebook want to do more of that, because they want to give us better data to spend more money with them, but they don't give us the raw data, and we are more and more reliant on outside data to just tell us, hey, this user converted or not. And yeah, I don't know if it's a good trend. I think I see it more critically, because we won't be able to have control over the data anymore, and we will be only able to look into the system, see, oh, we had so many conversions. But if you look behind it, it's kind of a black box, and we wouldn't know what it is about. And Google and Facebook will never give us this data, and always will hide behind their trade secrets and say, oh, this is all machine learning. We don't know how it's actually working. That's an algorithm. So how can you actually know how accurate something is? So that's kind of a negative trend, I think, even though, it gives us maybe more data. We don't know where that data is coming from. All right. We are getting the Q&A section. If you have any more questions, I'm just going to go quickly over to the chat here. and see what is marked up. Unfortunately, the chat doesn't really resize. Haven't changed that problem yet. So we have some questions. I'm just going to go through these questions and then through the questions that I got previously. Yeah, I have a typo. That was right. Thanks you, Tanya. Can we get the cookie script? Michael asked. Yes, you can. I will link it up in the description below later on. Yes, any excuse, use your amazing Chrome extension. Nice played. Yeah, I thought so too. Oh, great, Michael. You haven't heard of GTM copy paste. You should check it out. It's a good extension, I think. Okay, we have Tanya saying set cookie GCLID. Michael says Julian created it. Okay, great. That's awesome. Enjoy. Do all Google ads have GCLIDs? No, only if you actually connect Google Analytics to Google Ads. That way, Google will automatically, or they call it auto tracking. You just need to click a checkbox and say auto track my URLs, and then it will be automatically attached. Yes, but most of them have it. I hope that makes sense. Example: YouTube search, YouTube display. Yes. If you use that auto tracking feature, there's a checkbox inside of your Google Ads account. Matthew asks, in Facebook, in the offline event, they also have the auto tagging function. I think you are referring to the new Facebook Click ID. I haven't really figured this one out. To be honest, or found any information that we can port data over. Tanya says, question regarding attribution. How do I replace conversion tracking for ads with Google goals and still see attribute the click to ads? Well, you can do this by connecting Google Analytics to Google Ads and then getting rid of your conversion tracking within GTM or your conversion tracking code. And this will then be still transferred over. You need to install the conversion linker tag as well, as this will port over to Google Analytics, and then Google Analytics will send that data to AdWords as well. So Ricardo says, Tanya, you can adjust that on Google Analytics, the attribution model. The attribution model can be changed in Google Analytics, but unfortunately that doesn't port over to AdWords in any sense. So AdWords, or if you do conversion tracking through Google Analytics will actually just use that non-direct last source attribution model to send over. And then Joe says, what would be the best way of tracking a conversion if a path is broken by the user calling the business? Right, and this, I don't know when you tuned in, Joe, we did a tracking challenge just earlier, which went through this. There's one tracking, if you do phone call tracking, you could do phone call tracking. You can set up a software like CallRails, which tracks when a user calls a number, and they can then tell you how many people have called this number and if they where they came from. Now, you could also ask on the phone information about the user that would lead you back to the source. How did you find out about us, right? This is obviously a little bit vague, but there are other mechanisms. CallRails could, CallRails, it depends on your business. There are tracking mechanisms and tracking softwares out there that when you call a number, this number will be personalized for this user, and the system in the background that personalizes that number knows exactly where the user just came from. So somebody came through AdWords and then called this number, and this number will be personalized to that user. So whoever is on the phone right now came through AdWords and exactly that keyword. So then when the user is closed on the phone, so he buys the product on the phone right away, then you could register that in the system. So the call center agent says, okay, this user has bought, and everything in the background then connects that back to the source. So there are systems out there that do that automatically. We can also do a free version of that, which is far harder to do probably, but you could ask your user to tell you a little ID that you can build into your website down below. Hey, can you read me that ID? Yes, 12345 on the phone. And then you know exactly, okay, the user had that client ID, and I'm going to transport that back into Google Analytics so I can see where the user came from. This is also something that's possible. I haven't heard about this, but that would be call tracking on the cheap. So I hope that makes sense, Joe, and answers your question. Cool. I'm gonna go into some questions that we had previously. So a lot of people wrote in and wanted to have some questions answered. So I'm gonna go through them really quickly. We have Lexi here. Whoops. Had the question, I have some troubles with conversion tracking. I use position-based for conversion tracking, and I see differences in conversion transaction between analytics and the AdWords interface. Sometimes when I look at a week later, it's corrected in AdWords interface. So I want to use analytics for tracking my conversions. I tested last month with some test orders, and there were 4 conversions missing in my AdWords overview. So my test was with iPhone, Chrome, Safari, Ghostery extension, and tried the ad blocker function from Apple, tested all from Mac and MacBook. So maybe you can tell me more why not all conversions came through. Pretty complex question here. So first of all, we are talking about attribution model. In AdWords nowadays, you can put in different attribution models, and you probably have chosen the position-based attribution model. Now, position-based, I'm just gonna go over to show you this. Position-based attribution is basically the first and the last one, I think. Here we go. So position-based is 40% to the first and then 40% to the last source, and then in between we will get some attribution there. So what does that actually do inside of AdWords? It would divide your one conversion and put attribution on this level. What does that mean in the end? I think what Google Analytics, Google AdWords really does, it takes all of your conversions over a big span of time and then applies this attribution modeling, especially on the cost basis and on the revenue basis, right? So that way you can look into your data and you can see, okay, I spent that much money, I made that much money based on this attribution model. It's not too much about how many conversions, 1, 2, 3. So when you have one conversion, would that now be divided into 40% here, 40% there, and so on? So it doesn't really work in absolute numbers. So that's why AdWords would later apply these rule models on it. And I'm not sure if they are going to divide your different conversions there, on the AdWords side at least, right? So if you had 4 conversions, it wouldn't be one here, one here, one here, but all of these conversions would need to be divided, right? So I'm not sure if you can look at absolute numbers in the transactions and then say, here's conversion modeling. Now, if you transfer this over to Google Analytics also has attribution modeling inside of their multi-channel attribution. If you go over here, into the conversion report, multi-channel funnels, and here we can also use attribution modeling. So we can use different mechanisms. I thought path length. Can I choose the attribution modeling here? Here under attribution is. So we have a model comparison tool where we can say, okay, I want to see what this would look like against position-based attribution modeling. But again, here they just show numbers. What are these numbers? Okay, these are conversions. These are weighted, but in the end, they look at mostly the revenue here and divide that revenue. If you use this tool, this doesn't mean at all that Google Analytics will change how they attribute sources. They always and still always use the last source that is non-direct. So if you look in any other tool here, in any other performance report, they will still use, or here in our acquisition report here, they will still use the last click or last non-direct source. So you are not changing anything around here by looking at a model comparison tool. You also cannot change the default attribution inside of this of Google Analytics. This is always the same unless Google Analytics changes something in the near future. So if you want to change over to, as you said, you want to change over to Google Analytics, I want to use analytics for tracking. I guess this means Google Analytics. Then you will not get the same results because the attribution modeling will not work if you use this outside of Google Analytics. That is my opinion. I'm not quite sure if there are any other AdWords gurus out there that say otherwise. But what I know is Google Analytics has one attribution model, and that's why you actually see differences there. And AdWords has a different attribution model. So I'm not sure why your conversions didn't show. I would say, again, not 100% accurate. Your N, or the, what's it called? The group that you tested with 4 conversions, it's not very big. So your sample size is very, very small, right? And if there is something goes wrong, it doesn't get tracked, okay. It seems like a huge deal, but if you have multiple conversions, thousands of conversions, this might be minuscule, and that's something you should compare. And I can't really give you too much insights because AdWords doesn't really give us the data about how conversions are actually tracked and why do I see 4, why do I see 4 here. You tested correctly already. You need to click on an ad and then you need to go through the steps. But if it didn't work in a capacity that you wanted to work, then doesn't mean that your setting as your conversion tracking is not set up correctly. If you have it set up and you made sure it's working with your extensions and so on, then this is on AdWords side and you can't really do anything about it. You can only ensure that your tracking is set up correctly and you have the right attribution modeling. But look at these attribution models again and think about if you want to use Google Analytics as the transaction source or the goal source. Then I have a question from Aaron. Aaron says, is there a way to attribute impressions based on conversions in Google Ads? Yes, there is. So if you look into your reports, the problem might be that I don't actually have good data. Is it ads.google.com, right? I don't have maybe not so good data right now in my accounts because I don't use AdWords too much anymore. But if you had a report, Google Ads also counts views, mainly on the display advertising. Okay. Mainly on the display advertising. I'm here in a demo account. Now I need to go over to my other account that I actually have data in. So mainly when it comes to display advertising, they count views. And you can look into your campaigns and there is a column that you can activate if we ever get to it. So here are the campaigns. You can go to your columns and you can choose conversion metrics. Where are the conversion metrics? Here. And we actually have view through conversions right here. And this would give you the relation of how many people have viewed and then converted. This is the only data that AdWords gives us, or Google Ads. My God, I get confused now. Google Ads or AdWords gives us on that front. We cannot analyze this ourselves. How many views were there? How many conversions were there? We have impression data, of course. But yeah, how many people actually saw the ad and then clicked on based on the ad. I hope this answers your question. Not quite sure if you might be using just Google search ads. That is something that doesn't really use the view through conversions, I think. It's only on display. So I hope that makes sense. Then Renee asked, hey Julian, I have recently looked at Google Ads website phone conversion tracking. The new interface, the whole thing changed. Yes, and that's why a lot of people ask me that. We asked Google, but at the moment there's no implementation guide through GTM by Google. That's true. If the client do not has a global site tag, it's even a bigger question. We actually did a workaround on this and implemented all codes that Google Ads gives us when we want to implement conversion tracking into one custom HTML tag, and it worked. But the same implementation and other websites just doesn't work. So Renee, I urge you to go into our training library. We have a tracking about, or a video about phone conversions, and it pretty much is still the same. It still works, and I would urge you to go through and use just the old tracking script to put that in. We also had a thread inside of our Measure Masters group that actually where people discuss this because they have the exact same problem. So I would refer you to that. But in the end, I would still use the old codes that you can find online, not inside of Google Ads interface, and use that to install your phone call tracking with the help of Google Tag Manager. And it still works. And yeah, I don't know, you said you had a workaround. I'm not really sure what that means, but in the end, I would use an older version of the phone conversion tracking with the help of Google Ads. I don't know if I can pull this up really quickly. Tracking with Google Ads. Okay, no, they don't have it here. I would need to find the right code, but you can still use a custom HTML code to install the phone call tracking to change that actually on your website, if that's what you're after. Sorry, I can't give you more information here because it would take more time to actually go through a proper example. Then we have Joe here. He has a client Google Ads campaign and 2 websites, and the user is transferred to another website and there he converts. They have separate UA codes. The conversion is being correctly attributed. I'm sure this is more of cross-domain tracking issue, which would love to get more coverage on it possible. Okay. First of all, if you have that kind of issue, if the user hops to different domains, I think it would be easier to just use the AdWords conversion tracking instead of importing anything from Google Analytics, because then the AdWords conversion tracking actually works cross-domain. It just cares about the click and if the user later converts. So it can connect that back. Unfortunately, nowadays with the more new conversion linker tag, you might need to look into this if you care a lot about Safari browsers. And yeah, that's something need to look in a little bit more. The other question that you had about cross domain tracking, yes, if you want to completely use Google Analytics and import into AdWords from there, you would need to cross domain track these. That would mean either you have same UA codes on the page, or you need to extra install one UA code from that one page from the user came through first, because you need to have the session connected in order for that data to be attributed correctly. And that is a bit tricky if you have already 2 UA codes installed. Maybe you want to unify them into one Google Analytics property. So yes, it is a cross-domain tracking. I would look into that, and we also have some videos in our training library to show you how to install cross-domain tracking. Then we have a question, I don't even know from whom that was. Sorry, I didn't copy the name over. My question is, how would you set up a segment that selects sessions that arrive at a product detail URL and finally buy that product? And another one for those who arrive a product detail card, but end up buying a different product. I've already tried with sequence segments, but it doesn't work fine. All right. So you want to set up a segment, and you have already used sequence segments. I also only know of sequence segments of how to do this in Google Analytics. So either in your sequence segments you done something wrong, which, I don't know, no offense, could always happen, or your data is not correct. But normally you would be able to go into an analytics account and say, and select data about what the user has done. And well, hold on, I need to go to a report actually. So just to show everybody who's watching, the sequence is something we see in, if we build a new segment, we can go to sequences here, and we can choose and build a sequence here based on different steps. So the first step is this, and yeah, this is a sequence. Play around with this a little bit more. Probably should do a tutorial on the sequence builder, because it is quite complicated to sometimes set things up. I don't have a better suggestion than the sequence settings. If you want to go hardcore and you really need that data, you could set something up on the tracking side. And you could say, I'm going to send over data about this particular product that the user viewed. And if he has later him bought, and fire certain event tracking into the system in order to track this accurately. But this is more of a measurement implementation rather than a implementation of the data that you already have. If you have enhanced e-commerce tracking set up, you could also set something up where you say, has the user viewed this product, plus, and then you add segments to it, plus the user has bought this product, right? And bought another product or so. The question is for me always, what do you want to do with the data? And this is not I couldn't quite answer this in your email. Do you want to use it for retargeting? Do you want to use it for analysis? And maybe there are other better ways to do things, not through Google Analytics and the sequence builder, but rather tagging the user correctly in terms of sending over custom dimensions or so. So that's something I would encourage you to look into. Sorry that I couldn't make it more concrete and give you an easy answer here. And then Matthew asked, he had a lot of questions. Google Analytics conversion tracking best practices. Since Safari made ITP 2.0, that's the new tracking protection from Safari, which prevents third-party tracking tools, it creates a lot of confusion about the conversion linker tag. I want to confirm my current understanding to make it sure. I think most of the fundamentals. Okay, 1. If using import to GA goals to AdWords, it should work directly. We don't need to do anything. That's correct. Google Analytics is a first-party cookie, and therefore, so just to give all of you a little bit of a context, Safari has introduced some tracking protection. So really tracking tools or ad tools couldn't set third-party cookies anymore, which Google ads and also Facebook ads were reliant on because they didn't have a connection to your website. So what they have now built is take that client ID information and push it into a first-party cookie. This is something we did actually on the little demo that we had earlier. Take that information, push it into a first-party cookie, and now that information is a first-party cookie, so it's for that website, and therefore it is able to track throughout on the website. And we can still do the tracking as before, just use the workaround. So I don't know how effective the whole Safari thing was. But if you use Google Analytics and import the tracking, yes, you don't have to install Conversion Linker. You don't have to care about this because Google Analytics is a first-party cookie, and Google AdWords will then utilize that information from the first-party cookie, which is Google Analytics, essentially. So with that, you wouldn't have to do anything. Second, if I implement Google Analytics through Google Tag Manager and not use import goals to AdWords, we are implementing Google Ads conversion tracking. That's correct. With GA and AdWords linked and auto-tagging on. Okay. Throughout Google Tag Manager, do we still need to deploy the conversion link across all pages in Google Tag Manager? Aren't AdWords supposed to read GA cookie information that are connected? You have Google Analytics and AdWords linked to auto-tagging through. So you're not using, I haven't tested this, but I would say yes, you would still need to have the conversion linker installed so that the data is read from the cookie when the AdWords conversion tracking fires. Yes, the data is connected, but it may not be available right away. Maybe that's something that's it would be logical if you connect Google Analytics and Google AdWords that they can talk between each other, server to server, but not client to server, so the browser of the user to the server. So I think you still need to install, in that instance, Conversion Linker, because it will pull that data from the cookie. Question 2 and question 3, okay. The difference of using goals imported from Google Analytics and set up conversion goal in Google AdWords by itself. By different, I mean the attribution model different and other aspects. Which should we choose? I think import goals from Google Analytics is more robust. So I hope my question was answered by our little presentation there. The difference, again, just to summarize, the difference between attribution modeling is that Google Analytics sees all the sources. It will use the last known source that's non-direct as the attributed source, and then send data over to AdWords or not. And if AdWords was part of the lifetime of the user coming to the page, so it was part of the source, it will not send that data over. Now, with Google conversion tracking, it doesn't care about any kind of other sources, it just cares about AdWords. So AdWords conversion tracking is a bit more greedier. You get more information into the system and therefore can optimize more. I think that is something that I would always appreciate, having more data to optimize on. So maybe that data is also in Facebook and maybe it should be attributed to Facebook. But what I would say is if you have more data, the machine learning and everything that you do in AdWords has more data to work with. That's why I would choose the conversion tracking of AdWords. That said, I would also, if you have that set up, not discard any information. You can always put that into the or not counted as conversion inside of AdWords. There's this column that I showed. That's important, so you have both data available. I think that the conversion tracking is still more robust in terms of having more control, pushing data over and knowing when a conversion actually happened. So that would be my 2 cents, but I talked to some AdWords experts and they all seem to still use the conversion tracking. That is correctly set up. All right. And then the last question, offline conversions. Is it true that we can only create offline conversions in AdWords, not able to create offline conversions in GA and then import to AdWords? I mean, for the offline sales. That's an interesting question. I actually looked this up, and you can import offline conversions into Google Analytics as well, but not through the interface. You need to use the measurement protocol. So you need to send over, in that case, the client ID with the actual conversion and send that over. The unfortunate thing there is that I don't know if the data will actually be reconnected to AdWords. That's something I would need to test out. I couldn't find any source that actually denies or affirms that. So my guess would be that the connection between AdWords and AdWords and Google Analytics is there. So once new data is available to be attributed, it might be that it just sends it over automatically. And you can actually do this retroactively. Otherwise, it wouldn't make too much sense to me why they even built something like this. And then as of Facebook is also starting using Facebook CLID. So that would be the Facebook Click ID to all outbound links. But the offline conversion is still limited to upload email name and phone number. Is it not like we can upload GCLID data directly? Correct. I didn't find anything inside of the Facebook documentation or in the marketing API that would let me match up this information more closely with the actual click ID, which makes so much sense, than with just the name and the email address. That said, I guess they have implemented it. So maybe they're getting used to this kind of thing. And now they are going to give us the ability. So hopefully this will happen soon, but I couldn't find anything just yet. I hope that answers your question. And then Andre had another question in a Facebook group. Google Analytics, product list performance, how to track. I think I need some tag. Now I have not set. Product list performance. Product list performance is a feature of enhanced e-commerce tracking. If you want to track enhanced e-commerce tracking, you would need to send that data over, and you need to have a lot of different data points set up for enhanced e-commerce tracking to work throughout. Now, especially for product list performance, you need to know what product list are you looking at. In this case, would be maybe a category. You need to have the different products as impressions, and you would need to have all that information then sent over and connected to the other enhanced e-commerce tracking. So just to give you an example, right, do we have enhanced e-commerce tracking? We have that demo store somewhere. I hope this is it. Yeah. So here we are on a product page or on a product listing page. So this data needs to be available in the data layer. And then you need to send over data about the impressions of what products were actually shown. And you need to send over the list, the product list. So in this case, the list is called homepage. And then all that data will go into Google Analytics and will fill your enhanced e-commerce tracking product list performance. Where's the product list performance? Okay, I'm in the wrong account. To go over conversions, enhanced e-commerce, performance, checkout performance, sales performance, product list performance. Here we go. So all that data will go into this record, and it will give you the data about how many people viewed that particular product list, how many clicks did you reach, and the CTR and so on. Now, if you want to tie this back to your conversion data, you also have to have enhanced e-commerce transaction tracking set up. So that's definitely something you need to set up correctly. And enhanced e-commerce tracking is much bigger. It's just not just one tag and click and everything is done. No, you need to have an enhanced e-commerce implementation. So I'd urge you to look into our live training that we did a while ago, which was enhanced e-commerce tracking, about enhanced e-commerce tracking. I hope that helps. And did we have another question? Any more? What was this? My question is how to segment. Okay, segment we already had. Any more questions, guys? I'm gonna go over back to the chat and see what you have written. Sorry if I missed anything. Tanya says, will the same conversion linker treats conversion apply to Facebook ads too? Conversion linker doesn't have anything to do with Facebook ads. Facebook ads is something that you have probably a Facebook pixel installed, and they deploy this actually automatically. Now the advantage is with Google or with Facebook is that you just have one pixel and they don't have too many confusions about Google site tag, Google tag manager, Google Analytics conversion import, and so on. So there are so many differences. I mean, Google hasn't really come to grips with that this is actually still something that bothers a lot of people and cannot go back and forth to do this. So yeah. So conversion linker doesn't have anything to do with Facebook. Matthew says, why not just use Google forwarding number and offline phone call conversion? Right, this is something you could do with, but only with Google Ads. So you need to have Google Ads set up. If you have something else, if you want to track conversions from all different other sources, then you need to have a phone call tracking system that actually gives you more abilities on that. Adrian says, I want to track my Facebook links, just regular links where you lead the customer to your own website. I read sometimes about Facebook Click ID, the new Facebook parameter that can add UTM codes. Yes, so first of all, you need to have UTM codes in order for Google Analytics to know where the user came from, and if you want to tag them in certain cases in campaigns and so on, right? So you would need to use UTM tags if you really want to know which campaign did the user come from. Now, a while ago, Facebook actually said we will now have templates that you can set up, so these get automatically filled. Unfortunately, they just took out that feature again, and I don't know if it's gonna come back. I haven't heard of it yet coming back. And the Facebook Click ID is not something that you can use at the moment. You cannot relate that data back to Facebook. So the Facebook Click ID is something that is useless for us right now. I think Facebook uses it internally. I hope that helps. So you would need to use UTM tags and tag them correctly. No way around it. Marketing Stratege says, the old phone conversion tracking doesn't work for new clients. Oh, wow. I haven't heard about this one yet. Would be interesting to hear. Then we only have the ability to set up the global site tag, which would really suck. And yeah, in Google Tag Manager terms, it wouldn't really work. So how could we test this? I would actually need to set up a new account in Google AdWords and then test the phone conversion tracking. That would suck. Anyways, this is something that Google is still trying to figure out, I guess. And we also trying to figure out. But thanks for letting me know. I will keep that in mind if I hear more of this later on. Then Mantic asked, if you link Google Analytics and AdWords and you do have Conversion Linker, does it interfere or something? No. That would be my first answer. Second answer, what should it interfere? Question is, what interferes? The AdWords Conversion Linker really just pushes information into a cookie. It doesn't do more than that. Sometimes it can also do cross-domain stuff, I saw, but yeah, really just do, it doesn't interfere with anything. Yeah. Okay, Tanya says, can we import GA goals into Facebook interface at all? Or would you recommend using GA account traffic source reports? First part, can we import GA goals into the Facebook interface at all? So somebody goes to your website and converts, he buys a product, right? Now you have a tracking point inside of Google Analytics, which says this user has converted, or they're really a conversion has happened. Now you can, the question is, if you take that data and upload it to Facebook, Facebook wouldn't know what to do with it, right? It wouldn't be able to track and say, this user has clicked on this ad, and that's why I'm gonna give it a, put this into the ads account, for example. You would need to have data that Facebook actually can relate back to. Let's say you have two tables and you need to match them up against each other. You need to have one key or one column that actually can be recognized by Facebook and by your tracking system. In this case, in Facebook's case, it would be the email address. Now, the email address is not something that you have in Google Analytics, and therefore you cannot relate that data back unless at the same time, when you track that conversion, you also check in a third-party system like a Google Sheet or so the email address of that user, because maybe you know that email address because the user is logged in at that point in time. What you could do, or let's say you have a conversion. You see, okay, ABC has converted with that conversion number or order ID. You could go into your shopping cart system and say, who has that order ID? You see, Tanya has that order ID. I take Tanya's email address and make a list in my Facebook, in my Google Sheets. And inside of my Google Sheets, I have now my list of all the email addresses that converted. And that's something you could upload to Facebook. And then Facebook could match it back. So yes, with a workaround, it is possible. But Google Analytics data as a whole, just taking that Google Analytics data and sending it to Facebook, no, it wouldn't work. Then you had the second question, would you recommend using Google Analytics account traffic source reports? For what? To attribute sources? Yes, I mean, in Google Analytics, you can always see which sources did it come from, but you might not know exactly which ad a user clicked on. That's not something that Google Analytics provides, unless you do very, very sophisticated UTM tracking. So each and every ad has a different UTM tag. I hope that helps. Then Marketing Stratege says it worked with global site tags, but not for all website. But not for all website. Okay, then. So I guess he's talking still about the phone call tracking, right? And then can you send you email with your workaround with global site tag? Yes, I can. No, can you send an email with our workaround with global site tag? Okay. So you want to send me an email with your workaround, or should I send you an email? I don't have a workaround with global site tag. I actually don't use global site tag that much, I prefer using Google Tag Manager. So yeah, if you have any suggestions, please write me an email. That would be great. Adrian says, but Julian, I see your current post that included normal links. When I open the website like URL, Facebook click, UTM campaign, I guess it's possible somehow currently. Not sure what you're referring to. Not really sure what you're referring to. Let me know. Then Adrian, it works, just added below to additional URL parameter to a level. Okay, I'm going to show this. So this one works now with the two curly braces, Matic. That would be interesting because they took it out and then they put it in again. So good to know if that's something. Yeah, the regular posts are also tagged for us. When I send out a regular post on Measure School that is not an ad, we also have UTM tags on those. But these are something that we put in, and we just I think the buffer does this automatically. So it's not something that we do very consciously. Matic says if you are referring to paid, of course. Okay, no, yeah, paid. And Tanya says thank you, Julian, super duper. Okay, great guys. We have done a training almost, when did we start? Almost 2 hours now, what? It's crazy. Okay, 1 hour, 20 minutes it says. Yeah, well, it's 1 hour, 20 minutes. Crazy, okay. All right, guys. Thanks for sticking around for so long if you have seen this live. If you have any more questions, I'm hopefully we'll be able to be picking this up in our Facebook group, or later on, I think the chat will close, so I won't be able to hang out in the chat when I end this live stream. Anyways, for now, I thank you. If you have any more questions, if you have anything, I hope to see you around for the next live training, and keep the questions coming so we can answer them live next time as well. This live stream, this live training will be available later on, so you can rewatch it if you want to. And we'll be able to do this again, hopefully next month. I will put up another date. I would love for you to be there again. So if there's no more questions, thank you very much for being here. And as always, my name is Julian. Till next time.